Now
I think now it's live.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm Ajahn Cunda.
I'm Ajahn Kovilo.
Nisabho.
And we're here.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays,
Happy
everyone.
holidays, yes.
We have Christmas today and Kwanzaa coming up.
Yep, tomorrow.
And Hanukkah has passed. And any Buddhist holidays on the horizon? In Judaism, there was always several.
Something coming up.
There's always something like there.
I think quite a few people do call Christmas Buddhamas, you know, if you want to feel more Buddhist.
The famous story of Ajahn Chah deciding to have Buddhismus at Panana Chat or something like that.
Mm.
Do you remember what was the celebration?
I don't know if there was. I think he just decided to call it Buddhismus. There was a tree involved, though. So
I had a sort of a humbug experience at Waigiri because there were lights that were hung, and I thought, you know, this is a Buddhist monastery, you know. So anyway, yes, happy holidays to everyone.
we people can post questions as they like. We'll be discussing the Majjhima Nikaya 8, the Saleka Sutta, and on effacement, and also, someone asked if there's a way that we'll be informing in advance of what sutta we'll be discussing or topic for the next week. And yes, we will be announcing it on our Fridays and on the calendar, Pacific Hermitage calendar, and the live stream announcements on YouTube. Both will have the sutta and the link to the sutta. So you can look there for that.
Okay, very good. So, should we get into it again? The Saleka Sutta?
Yeah.
Unless there's any questions. Anybody have any? Oh, Tamira. Thanks, Tamira. I said that to my mom last night. That was Tamira's. That is a tradition. I'll just let Tamira commented that all Jewish people on Christmas get Chinese food. And I don't know why that's the tradition. Maybe it's just to go against.
I didn't know.
But yeah, it's true. It's true.
Maybe those are the only restaurants that were open.
It could
Christmas.
be. My mom was just telling me she was going to have Chinese food today with some of her friends or something. So, anyway, back to the sutta. You were thinking of how you were mentioning that these traits that the Buddha is talking about there's a particular way that he says that in terms of its opposite, like if one is given to obstinacy,
Yeah.
then one has non-obstinacy to by which to quench it.
Right. Yeah, no, I've kind of gone back and forth. I mean, the sutta is, pretty black and white. You know, you've got, for any of these 44 different negative qualities, in each of the iterations, the Buddha says you have, so for anger, you have non-anger to dispel it, to abandon it. For greed, you have non-greed to abandon it. And I've gone back and forth on whether I find this attractive. Like, this is great. It makes practice seem so simple. Okay, I've got, drowsiness or dullness coming up. Okay, I just need to do non-drowsiness, non-dullness to correct it. And then other times thinking, it's too simplistic. It's too black and white. It's too like this and that. It's not practical. And right now I'm kind of leaning more in the direction of this is practical. It's simple, but it's actually doable as well, and only, I've got certain thoughts on that I could continue talking about, but I'm curious if either of you have you thought about this kind of dynamic of the simplicity or oversimplicity of the way that things are phrased here?
I think that I appreciate the focus. So to orient those who may have gotten lost since yesterday or didn't join us on Tuesday, the Sutta on Effacement is this long list of the Buddha sort of speaking about these 44 different qualities which one should basically cultivate to give up or to give up bad qualities, which are their opposites. And many of them are somewhat, would seem to be pretty basic and have to do with sort of ways of speaking and acting. And and the link is there. So it's a brilliant sutta and really important and speaks to the breadth of the training. And so Ajahn Kovilo, the part that I find really interesting around using, say, non-hatred to give up hatred, heedfulness to give up negligence and stuff, is the focus on, I think in so many, the Buddhist kind of milieu today, there's this, focus on kind of seeing something come up and then letting it go. But here there does seem to be this emphasis on the bright state counterpart, which counterbalances and dispels that sort of negative side. And I think that's one of the unique contributions Buddhism gives to Western psychology. Is so much of Western psychology is focused on sort of getting rid of and softening our neuroses. Like famously, the DSM-4 had, I think, 1,999 pages dedicated to problems that, the human being could have. And then there was like half a page to positive qualities and what mental well-being was. The DSM-5 did slightly better, and I think they had like 150 pages dedicated toward positive well-being. And Freud famously said that the best he could do is transform your neurotic misery into normal human unhappiness. And I think Buddhism's like unique in that it actually has words and articulations of these really positive mental states, like the 7 factors of awakening. And I think that's one of the really unique contributions that Buddhism gives, is like a really robust picture of what mental well-being looks like. And for me, the sutta saying like one uses heedfulness to give up negligence is pointing to that. Like you don't just have to see and let these negative things dissolve, but also to cultivate the bright in place. And the sutta goes into that in quite a lot of detail, I think.
It's a great point.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that comes up for me around it is the practicality of like, if you have anger, then you have non-anger by which to quench anger. And it's interesting because as you bring that up, you're talking about the practicality and just listening to Nisabho around this. There's a brightening factor that Buddhism just is constantly bringing up all the time. And in terms of, people often say Buddhism's all about suffering, and there's no happiness, but it's actually all about cultivating happiness. Mm-hmm. However, I would say it's interesting, the thinking about these traits, like the actual doing of it. Like when you're angry, you're not actually given to non-anger. You're given to anger. It's something that like kind of even in this sutta, you get led down into like a bog, or you get led downwards, sunk in the mire. Is one of the ways it's translated, and it's so easy to keep sinking when we are feeling like we're in a negative state, and so I can agree that it's difficult. It's not easy work to surmount a negative state with a positive state, just because the tendency, at least I've noticed in myself, is just to keep going into that, sinking into that mire. It's not easy to get out, and so you kind of want to give up or give into it, just because it's a particular energy that the mind is going to. It's just kind of moving, and so I understand why. If one's not learned in this, or one is not actually practicing this habit of using the opposite of negative states to kind of surmount them, and by using positive states, then it can be kind of daunting and difficult. I could see why others have a problem, for example, with metta, or any of the ways that we try to deal with our difficult mental states. They're kind of intractable sometimes. They don't seem like they have much movement.
Well, Tamir sort of speaks to that a bit, and she says she finds it difficult to just say stop it and do the opposite. For me, it's more effective to notice the suffering that arises when the defilements are there. So I mean, that's thoughts, Ajahns?
Oh yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, the first thing is we're always trying to be aware and notice things. And that's what I was saying, is it's sometimes helpful to just be aware. But if similarly with what Tamir is saying, it's just more difficult. But I think that it can be extremely effective, because once you're aware of something, you can see the arising and passing of it, and it does have less power over the mind. But I found in terms of my own practice, if I'm not actually leaning towards an uplifting state, trying to actually bring myself out, if I'm just being aware of it, it can kind of be a feeling of just being like aware of dukkha, aware of dukkha, aware of dukkha, and it's not necessarily moving.
Yeah.
So for myself, even though it's harder, the next step for me is to kind of, oh, how can I make myself, less angry or happier in this moment, or whatever it might be that is counteracting an unwholesome state.
I think that you use the word leaning, like leaning into the positive, and I think that can be done skillfully, and that's kind of what this discourse is talking about. Like, there's certainly a place for accepting and seeing the way things are, but yeah, we want to see it in order to eventually to overcome it, and yeah, when I have looked at this discourse and be like, oh, it's too simple, it's too Pollyanna-ish, you just say stop it, and and then that's what the Buddha's suggesting, but when you look at it in terms of just the present moment, break down the practice into what's here right now, it makes this discourse something that you can take steps towards in this present moment. There's the understanding that only certain mind states, only one mind state, can occur in a given instant. And yeah, so if I am bringing up non-anger, that's the example we keep giving, even if I can do that just for a moment, then one thought of metta is one moment of non-anger, and it makes you have to do that a lot, because whatever traditional Buddhist understanding says, there's trillions of quote unquote mind moments within a second, but yeah, the more we can bring about the positive, even if that bringing about is just by seeing, that's a first step, it's still moving in the right direction.
When it speaks a lot to the sutta that we discussed our first week, which was the Majjhima Nikaya 2, all the defilements. And as a refresher, that sutta talks about 7 means of abandoning defilement. And the first is seeing, and seeing things in terms of the Four Noble Truths and the suffering involved. So, seeing a defilement. But then there's those other 6 means, the final one of which, and I think it's significant, it's kind of the last, and sort of the note the Buddha ends on, is abandoning defilements through cultivating the 7 enlightenment factors, specifically. And so, yeah, like that list of how to abandon defilements begins with looking at the suffering involved in a state, but then it moves through all these other ways, and in the end, cultivating the bright. And I think that's really important because in the Dhammapada verse on the well-trained mind, it says suffering follows the ill-trained mind like what is it? The wheel of a cart, the hoof of an ox, and happiness follows the well-trained mind, like shadow does one, like a shadow that never leaves. And suffering in that image is the wheel of the ox cart is so easy to see, and we can fixate on it so much. And that's suffering, like it's very coarse, and it's why it's so easy to spend hours, getting into like a past argument again and again. But happiness is it's much more subtle, and I think that's why it's so important to give attention to and articulate and make much of and really cultivate, because it's more slippery, and it's much easier to just dwell in like aversion all day rather than really look to the good qualities of those things around us. We're just naturally inclined to look at suffering more. So I think that's why the Buddha really talks and emphasizes like this means of cultivation, and why it's so important to articulate in detail and make much of those qualities in the mind.
Yeah, I was thinking of like a quality around gratitude, and how often gratitude is missed. And it's like there's so many things to be grateful about every day of our lives. Just the fact that we're able. I mean, for those of us who are living today, it can be pretty bad. You know, the pandemic's going on. People are having a hard time getting food on their table. But yet there's, you know, you can say that at least for most of us, we're not in the U.S., we're not in a war-torn country. Although some might argue that there's some elements of that right now. But it's, you know, there's just so much that we can find in our lives that we can be grateful for. And if we don't move in that direction, we're just kind of, you know, sort of humdrum. It's sort of just like, this is my normal life, that nothing really happens to me. But every day there's like a wonder, you know, just the fact of getting up again. You know, you didn't die. You know, you woke up again, and you have the use, many of us, but not all of us, have the use of our limbs, and we can breathe, we can see. You know, for any of us who have some senses, we can be grateful for those things, but we take them for granted so much. And for me, it's like, if you bring that up, so, oh wow, I shouldn't, you know, tomorrow I could be blind, you know, or the whole kuti could be burned down, or the whole house, or whatever. My friends could hate me, or whatever it is. But there's this gratitude that can occur every day, and again, it's so easy not to think of that, you know, not to bring those things up. And when I do bring them up, there's just so much happiness.
That's a great point. People probably know the 4 boundless mind states. You've got metta, loving kindness; karuna, compassion; mudita, like sympathetic or empathetic joy; and then upekkha, which is equanimity. Sometimes, and this is kind of a working hypothesis, and I'd be curious what you two think, or what other people think, is that a 5th boundless mind state could be gratitude. And this is a question I ask myself from time to time. Is that really the case? Could gratitude really be boundless, in the sense of, can I really practice like you're suggesting, in which, when I put the test to myself, can I feel grateful right now? It seems like it is always possible. I mean, admittedly, we're in incredibly fortunate circumstances, but even if we weren't, like even if we were in the worst dukkha and being oppressed, I think there is a good case that there, and you can't, you know, I couldn't say that, you know, someone else should feel gratitude in any situation, but for oneself, like, it is an uplifting mind state, like you're saying, and other people are on the chat are saying that they identify with this word leaning, and in the sutta the Buddha says, so I say that even the inclination of mind towards wholesome states is of great benefit. So what should be said of bodily and verbal acts conforming with such states? So this inclination, you know, gratitude is a way that we're, can I be grateful? What can I be grateful right now? It's a tiny question that you can just ask yourself, and then you just start.
Yeah, moving down that, or up.
Yes, exactly.
Up that tunnel.
I agree, and I mean, it'd be interesting to try to map gratitude onto one of the other 4, but it's kind of nice to really place it on its own pedestal. I think it deserves it, and someone in the chat was also saying that, you know, Buddhism puts the weight on dukkha, or suffering, and not sukha, and I think that's a common understanding in the West when people come to the teaching and think that it just sounds so dour, especially the Theravada take on it. You know, I mean, we're constantly chanting about how we, you know, are going to die, or things like this. And there's the sort of translation of life is suffering, which is a very problematic translation. But I think it's important to realize that the Buddha was teaching. In Christianity, there's 2 means of approaching truth. There's apophatic, which is like teaching truth by what it is not. So talking about God by what he's not in the Christian tradition. And then there's cataphatic, which is talking about truth by what it is, as like an affirmative. It is this, God is this. And the Buddha, I think, of all teachers in the past, was perhaps the most specialized at talking about at apophatic method, and talking about truth by what it is not. And so he's constantly saying, you know, the whole strategy of not self is, you are not this body, you are not these feelings. But then as to what you are, he left that for us to discover on our own, because the assumption is, if you do let go of all these false assumptions, then you'll naturally come to what you really are. And I think the same thing applies to his teaching on suffering, is that look at the suffering in your life, and as you let it go, you'll begin to experience more and more what happiness really is. But the more you try to define that too clearly, you get into trouble and become stuck on these concepts. And I think he saw that happen to so many teachers in his time. I mean, his teachers were getting stuck in these sort of very elevated states of meditation. So it seemed like he took this very brutal tact of just saying, you're not this, and then trusting that we would come to what we are. And similarly, pointing to suffering as the principal thing to be seen and let go of, but then acknowledging that we will come to a brighter and brighter happiness. And so under the surface, even though on the surface I think Buddhism can seem about suffering, I mean, it really does lead to one to happiness, and it's a very bright path, but it can be forgotten. And I think as Westerners with like a dry materialist upbringing, it's kind of important to think about the brightness too, and articulate it more to ourselves, maybe in the gratitude,
Yeah, absolutely. It's I find that's unfortunate. Even when I was studying Buddhism in college, that was sort of like the misnomer, or what was misunderstood. The professor actually said, everything is dukkha. It's not that there is dukkha, which is as we've been taught. The Buddha is just acknowledging the fact that there's suffering. It's that everything is dukkha, and we can say, well, to an extent, that's not completely wrong in terms of saying that, well, there's a tinge of dukkha in everything except for nibbana, the unconditioned, because anything that's conditioned has to be therefore tinged by dukkha, as I understand it. But still, the goal and what Nisabho is talking about is always this uplifting factor, this kind of this sense of how it is that you can pull yourself up and out and and stand upright and be really as beautiful as you can be in your behavior towards yourself, towards your fellow human beings. And the important thing, as we were like talking about gratitude, is the more that you can give yourself to that, even though it is a difficult, it's, the Buddha never said this was an easy path. The more that you kind of, as Nisabho was saying, you experience these positive uplifts, you experience like more and more that's actually inclining you towards that. So it's kind of like if you stay in the mire, you're just gonna stay there. But if you try to surmount these things, then you get this kind of push, like a surfer has, like with a wave coming behind him. It's like this. It's just this energy that's pushing you forward. And without kind of getting involved in positive states, then we don't see it. We can't kind of we can't pay attention to it. Or we can't see it very clearly because it's so easy to just kind of sink, like quicksand. So easy to stay in that area, I find.
It speaks to the holiday season too, like the sort of push towards those positive states. It's one thing to spread metta on our own, and that's really great, but just the act of giving, and like that's so often forgotten in Western Vipassana circles, is it's all about meditation. And in Thailand you go and you realize that the 10 paramitas, the spiritual perfections, begin with giving, dana. And in Thailand there's like this brightness. So I mean, it's a good thing to think about on the holidays, is just the act of giving is so brightening, and it's so often overlooked. And, if everyone just did one act of, random act of kindness today and gave something to some random person or something, I mean, it brightens a day immensely, so I think that gets overlooked a lot, but it's the same sort of wave pushing one, I think, towards brighter states.
There's several questions there.
Ajahn Kovilo, what do you think about the last? This is your namesake. What about the last admonition to Cunda?
The quenching.
Yeah, one that is stuck in the mire cannot pull another out of the mire.
Oh, that's
we don't have to get into that. We can also look at these questions.
That's a good question. A lot of times what the Buddha's talking about in the suttas is he has quite a high bar for what one is sort of required to have in order to do things like teaching or to be effective in terms of helping other people. And sometimes if you read it to sort of a black and white, this is what the Buddha is saying is a lot of people will argue that, well, it's just stream entry. He's saying that you have to at least have had a noble attainment in order to help somebody else. And in this way, in terms of sort of really helping them see dukkha, and truly helping them understand where it is that they're suffering. And I see the reason for that, because if you're consistently sort of involved in your own self-view, and you're suffering and not seeing very clearly, you know, like for example into the 3 characteristics or whatever it is, you're clouded. You can't quite really help someone. And I would, to a certain degree, say that is correct. Like if somebody is too, you know, if they just have too many defilements clouding up their view, how can they really help bring somebody out? But they can possibly bring somebody partially out, or they can help somebody, I think, in a way. And that's the if you don't look at it from that black and white sort of view of just absolutism, you have a sense of like, well, everybody can help everyone else, but we might not be able to thoroughly bring somebody, for example, to you know, to stream entry if we're not a stream enter. That's not possible. But what is possible is that we can at least assist each other along the path. So that's one way I was kind of thinking about it.
Yeah, it makes sense. And just to give people some context, because it might be, people might find it interesting or maybe even disturbing to hear, you know, I mean, in Thailand, you know, some of the very conservative Thai forest tradition, senior monks, and there's an ethos like that kind of takes this principle that, if you're stuck in the mud, i.e., if you're not enlightened, if you're not yet a Sotapanna, a stream enter, then you have no business teaching at all. So it's quite common in some very strict forest monasteries that the head teacher will, say, basically that's the party line, is that you don't teach until you...
There are less YouTube live chats in Thailand for this reason.
Or if people were taking that principle, there would be less YouTube live chats, whereas not everybody takes this principle, so you have tons of Facebook pages in Thailand. But I think the point you're making is a good one, that, you know, if you're closer to the shore, you know, if this is like a bog or, you know, a sand trap or something, you know, if you're closer to the shore, you do have a little bit more of a foothold, and you can, especially if you're calm and you're not flailing about yourself, you know, you can give a hand to someone who's further into the bog in a certain aspect, you know. And I think that's true in the practical example of someone actually sinking into, you know, some kind of bog, or in the spiritual life. And there's a place for it. I certainly have experienced it. I mean, growing and learning from people who I feel like maybe are not, you know, enlightened, or certainly not enlightened. You know, you can learn all over the place.
No, and the I really agree, and I think it also helps us, you know, when you disengage from, say, friends or some active social party, something like that, to go meditate and pursue an individual practice, I think it can be looked at as selfish at first. I mean, certainly we receive criticism as monks along those lines. You know, what are we doing? But I think as you engage more in the practice, you see that by developing yourself, it really does send out ripples to those around you, and people are so hungry for spiritual relationship. And I know that for me, meeting some amazing teachers like Longpa Pasano and stuff, you see so clearly that individual cultivation is not wasted. And even though most of us have to operate partially in the mire as we work to kind of pull each other out altogether, which is the beauty of Kali and Nimitta, you see the power of someone who's really purified their heart so clearly when you encounter them and understand the truth of this statement at one level, is that the world is so hungry for those spiritual reference points, and we just don't have many. And so I think, you know, when people maybe look critically at one's spiritual practice, or you have a critical voice dismissing that time spent alone as selfish, it's really important to remember that spiritual center point in each of our lives, whether it be a teacher or just our own personal time given to meditation, potentizes all action externally. It makes all the difference, and it's not a waste, and it's certainly not selfish. So I think that's important to remember as well.
Yeah, you take just the final admonition in this discourse. It's the Buddha says, okay, he's talking to Cunda, but in the Pali you actually see that it's in plural. So he's talking to Cunda, but there's probably a group of monks who are also listening. But
That's
he says,
interesting.
what should be done for his disciples out of compassion by a teacher who seeks their welfare and has compassion for them, that I have done for you, Cunda, and all you other meditators. There are these roots of trees, these empty huts. Meditate, Cunda. Do not delay, or else you will regret it later. This is our instruction to you. And that's kind of speaking to the point that you make, that, meditation isn't a selfish thing. It's the Buddha, who's the most compassionate being, is telling us, that, spending time alone in cultivating wholesome mind states, meditating, learning to be able to look at our mind, that's time very well spent. And I think he makes a good point, a compelling point that, when we do get to the time when we're, say, on our deathbed, are we going to look back on our lives and wish that we had, spent, more time cultivating wholesome mind states or not? I think it's a very potent reflection.
Yeah, it's one of the 10 reflections that we recite in our monasteries, just to question, like, now, we do have life, and at a certain point, either it could be taken from us, instantaneously, or in over a long period of time, if we possibly can stretch out our life and we live longer. But that being said, like, there is a kind of a question we can ask ourselves now. It's like, well, how do I see my practice now? How do I see how I'm treating other people right now? How do I see am I able to uplift, bring uplifting states of mind? And if the question's no, then it's so helpful to just think, well, there's no blame in that. It's just, okay, I better get going. I better kind of rile myself, kind of get myself into action. And that's why it's so, it's so important. Like, and the dual aspect that the Buddha's talking about, like when we're cultivating internally, but then he doesn't leave out the external. That's what this is all about. There's always this admonition, this encouragement to, bring your positive qualities out into the world. It's not just like go in, and forget about whatever everything else is happening out there. There's always even just people who are in solitude. There's a sense of thinking about others. That's the 4 boundless, or we're talking about 5 boundless qualities. And it's just so important. And as you said, you can really see that in people when they've cultivated these qualities, when they've cultivated their own mind. Yeah. It's just such a positive, beneficial thing for the world.
What? Sorry to...
Go ahead.
I just have a question. What do you two think about this intention, like making the conscious aspiration while you're alone? Kind of like you're saying, may my practice be for the benefit of all sentient beings. Have either of you used that specific phrase or something similar to kind of engender the exact, like, to encourage yourself? Like, if I was just totally thinking about myself, may this be for my own benefit, it's kind of like dry-hearted. Whereas if you have this altruistic motivation, even if you're doing the exact same thing, this shift of motivation, I think, can be powerful. Any experience with this type of thing?
Yeah, many of our teachers advise to the first thing you do upon waking and the last thing you do upon going to sleep is to bow to, if you have a Buddha image. If you don't, some people bow east. I know that there's stories of disciples in the Buddha's time who always slept with their heads facing towards where the Buddha was. That might not go over well with your partner if they're not on the same page. But yeah, I think it's a good admonition, because when you wake and go to sleep, your mind is so malleable. And so I think paying respects to the Triple Gem, but also that spreading of merit, which sounds very kind of esoteric and it can kind of hit wrong for a lot of Westerners as this sort of economy, esoteric economy of merit. But really what it is, yeah, expanding your intention to include all beings. And so I really try to do that before I go to bed every night, is spread merit and dedicate the goodness of my life to those around me. And in Thailand and most Buddhist countries in particular, there's a very special practice of recollecting the dead regularly. When people give alms in Thailand, most frequently they'll pour water into a waiting dish, and it's supposed to speak to this sutta, which we also chant as a blessing, in which the Buddha speaks about how goodness flows down to the departed. And we forget our dead and our pasts, those who have passed, so easily in the West, because we don't have these concrete means of bringing them to mind and dedicating goodness to them. And I think that's something that Buddhism places great weight on, and we should recollect. So I think really bringing it as a concrete daily ritual into one's life to spread this merit is very helpful. And I know, Ajahn Kovilo, you've been doing that quite a bit in this past year, especially at CTTB as well. So yeah,
it's true. I mean, yes, living at City of 10,000 Buddhas, or Dharma Realm Buddhist University, I think the Chinese tradition, and actually also in traditional Thai Buddhism, there's more emphasis and weight given to this sharing of merit practice. And yeah, it's actually like ritualized into the daily schedule. Before the meal, there's a ceremony where myself or the senior monk, or you definitely don't have to be a monk to do this, but basically, setting an intention, like, may this, actually literally we're using a little bit of food, 7 grains of rice, I'm told. I don't always count, but something about that, and then dedicating this food to people who have passed away that we care about. But the way I think about it, like, not the physics of it, like, is this food somehow transferring into energy and then somehow going to people who have passed away who are somehow still around somewhere? Yeah, the physics of it, are not something which makes sense, but thinking about people who've passed away is, I have found, a useful practice. And it's definitely not wasted time,
Mm.
Yeah, it's essential, like, for me, in terms of, like, getting myself out of this sense of me, this sort of, this is my practice, this is what I'm doing, this is for me, I'm going to get enlightened, and whatever it might be. And it's just not, when you add, again, that the fact that there are other beings in the world and you're wanting to benefit them, it just kind of, it opens the mind up. I mean, I can find, like, my own meditation, for example, has a palpable change to it if I'm integrating, like, the thought or the well-being of other people. Whereas if it's sort of like, a sort of greedy, this is for me, this is what I'm doing for myself, it doesn't, it can be helpful, because if you're negligent towards yourself, if you're feeling hatred towards yourself or something like that, that can be a very helpful thing to recollect. I'm going to do something that's quite wholesome for myself, and that's good. And so you can make yourself happy in that way. But on the other end, just like everything else, we can go towards an imbalance. So we then move towards just our own greed and selfishness. And then, unfortunately, in American culture, I find that although Americans can be incredibly generous and usually are sometimes the first people into a country that helps into when there's tragedy or some serious problems. But at the same time, there is a tendency that's different. We were talking about in Thailand or China, that the fact that there is this sense of wanting, wishing well to our ancestors, wishing well to our parents, wishing well to people who are connected to us. And that tends to be slightly less, I find, because, in America, like, greed is good. Seeking your own happiness and getting what you can for yourself is sort of seen as good. Not everybody would agree with that, but it does come up quite a lot, like my own independent view, my own independent life, what's important for me, how I live. And so by counteracting that, it's sort of sad to see that movement of mind that's sort of greedy or self-focused is it's quite unfortunate. And when we just kind of extend out in towards other people, and you talked about like the economy of merit, and unfortunately I think that's how we think of it. We think of everything as if, like, if I'm giving something to somebody else,
tit for
then,
tat.
yeah, it's being taken away from me. But that's not really how it's seen. The more that you give, the more that you receive. So it's something that I think, especially in America, that something that we can benefit from, and really, it's sort of something that if we give ourselves to, even again, it's more difficult. We have the potential to give back to ourselves and others in the same way.
I agree, Ajahn, and I think Jay has a question about the sutta as well. In the context of Venerable Mahachunda's question about, at the start of the sutta, about letting go of views, I read these pairs of skillful and unskillful qualities as the Buddha saying, don't dwell on views, just focus on what is skillful right here and now. In other words, focus on skillful action over philosophizing. Is this a valid way of understanding the sutta? Venerables?
Well, I definitely think that what Jay is saying there in that last part of the sentence, focus on skillful action over philosophizing, and that's definitely something that the Buddha says again and again, is, don't get too stuck in your own views of the world and your own all kinds of different views that he's got. The net of views, he's got so many different views that he brings up, the Buddha talks about. And so there are ways that people just, they can really just get stuck in thinking and coming up with ideas around who they are, what the world is. And a major point is actually to try to put that down, focus on what's present here and now, and essentially, try to use and understand these wholesome states. So
I think that's it. I mean, the use of the word philosophizing, I think, is perfect. The last of the 44 states that the Buddha keeps reiterating in this discourse is, others will adhere to their own views, hold on to them tenaciously, and relinquish them with difficulty. We shall not adhere to our own views or hold on to them tenaciously, but shall relinquish them easily. And I think philosophizing is exactly, that's like a one-word summary of what the Buddha's pointing to here. It's like the dogmatism or sense of earned dogmatism. Like, okay, I've got my station in the world, I've logically thought these principles out and they make rational sense to me, or, I've got this degree, so I'm, I can hold on to these views because of my status or whatever. But yeah, the Buddha's saying that that's not the point. Even if we have, a right view of the world, all the more, not to mention if we have a wrong view of the world, but that's not the end of the path in the least. That's our attachment to these attachment to views in general. Philosophizing can be a hindrance on the path, and the Buddha is pointing directly to that. So yeah, I think you make a really good point.
And the whole, it kind of brings us back to that, the majority of the Saleka Sutta, this sutta being focused on these concrete bodily acts of giving. It brings us back to what Ajahn Kovilo was speaking about in terms of the, making the practice for all beings, and gratitude as well is and also the breadth of the training that has made the Ajahn Chah lineage so successful, like living in community, and just that, these concrete acts of doing good and are profoundly transformative. And I've heard of the practice of people not eating until on a given day until they'd given something to another person to eat. I know people in my family have taken that on for a period of time as well, and I think that's one beautiful act as well. And I think it says a lot. I think the hierarchy in our Sangha can be off-putting to people, but what people don't always realize is that it makes us constantly be bowing. I I believe, have you ever counted how many times you bow at a monastery, like when you're surrounded by a giri or something?
So many.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
Every
It's a
day.
lot.
And you're constantly bowing to these images, to these ideals, and you're constantly serving your senior, those who are senior to you. And I think that constant focus on giving and giving up one's self-interest also really lends itself to a humbling of one's views. And just to say that these huge edifices of thought that, you know, are this philosophizing, all of them get undermined if we just engage in the, 38 or so of these admonitions, which are very simple and very basic, and there's daily opportunity for. So I think it's a good recollection on the holidays,
There's actually a name. I found this out. I was invited to Sri Lanka earlier this year, and there's actually a name for that practice of not eating before you've given something. It's called Saraniya practice.
Really?
Yeah, which
Cordiality.
refers back to, there's a list of 7 points of cordiality, one of which is sharing what you have with others, even the contents of your alms bowl. So yeah, at this monastery I was visiting in Sri Lanka, even the monks, sometimes we might think, we're monks, we don't have anything to give, what are we going to give before we eat? But at this monastery, there's like a specific time before the monks eat that there's a special table in the monks' area that after we've taken food into our bowls, then we can either go around and specifically put food from our bowl into the bowl of some other monk, or at least just take it out of our bowl and put it in a communal area that someone else could take. And it was a beautiful practice, and I was quite impressed with that.
Yeah, I can think of the opposite of that. Just kind of just wanting to have something for yourself. You've got food in your bowl, and you just think, oh, I've got what I wanted, and just that notion of giving it to somebody else is quite amazing. It's like because you can get stuck really in this kind of this feeling like this is mine, I don't want to give this, and as soon as you do, it's just such like a letting go feeling. There's just so much sukha that arises, I find. And the harder part, one of the examples that probably many of you online have heard about is, it's like when you have something to give, maybe you think, oh, I have 2 of these, I'll give one away. But which one do you give away? Do you give the one away that you want more, or do you give the one away that you want less? Like
The
if you
big
have a
apple
bigger
or
apple or a smaller apple. Yeah. And so it's important to also look at each step, though. I would say for somebody who gives the smaller apple, that's still giving. And sometimes we deny, we say, no, we have to get higher, and we get into this whole sense of like, I have to be better, I have to be more. And I want to also say that any sense of giving is important to actually convey. I was just reading a quote about the fact it's like that it's not that generosity should really be measured. And this is the opposite of what I'm just saying, is that you shouldn't measure your own generosity and just the fact that you can give, but it's when you're actually starving and everything in your bones says to hold on to this thing because you don't want to let it go. Your whole survival depends on it. At that point, you give up something. That's when you can really measure your own generosity. That's sort of, it's beautifully said, but I don't know if that's great to put the bar at that level. Eventually, I think we all want to be at that level, but really, just any sense of giving is so important, and it just feels so nice.
Do either of you have any stories of, say, there's a Dhammapada verse which is somewhat similar. In this discourse, there's a saying that others will be stingy, but we will not be stingy. Or to counteract the quality of stinginess, there's non-stinginess. But there's a Dhammapada verse which says, to conquer stinginess, use generosity. So do either of you have any personal stories or stories of others, like where, yeah, you're feeling stingy? Exactly like you're saying, I've got this thing, but I want to eat it. I want to use it. I don't want to give it away to someone, but then conquering that, kind of internal struggle, but then eventually just, okay, I'm going to give it, who cares about, an apple for one day?
Yeah, that comes up, all the time. It's sort of like, even just like time or whatever it is, something, just anything we're doing it together. There's just countless acts. Well, can I just drop what it is I'm doing right now, and help help out one of the, like the two monks who I'm living with here. And I do see that without that, it's like, no, I'm going to keep doing my own thing. It's just creates a mind state that's not very inclined towards, feeling good. So.
Yeah, and I read recently, I was reading a phrase that the Buddha said where he was talking about how if one's house is burning down, one should take one's valuables and place them outside, and that when one gives, what's given isn't gone; it comes back to one, and later in the future. And I think the final phrase he says is, "What is given is well salvaged from the burning of death and departure." And I think it's nice to really idealize, like, I want to, I just want to be able to give the big apple just because giving is good. And the Buddha identifies that as one of the best reasons to give. But sometimes you need a little bit of a kick to actually give the big apple. And I find sometimes then it is helpful to recollect, like, you're not really losing an apple. Like, you're gaining an apple in the long run. And that can sound, I think, transactional and bad, but the act of giving is so powerful that my experience is that even if these sort of, all these skillful means to get you to hand over the big apple, once they actually take place and once you've handed over the apple, the act of goodness is so powerful that it sweeps away any sort of, slightly, even these slightly unbeautiful ways of thinking about giving. The act is so powerful that sometimes it's just helpful to get yourself to hand over the big apple. It's hard to give away the big apple sometimes.
And the Buddha, he's quoted as saying, if you actually knew if your mind was completely open to the benefit of of generosity, like if you really truly understood it, you wouldn't hesitate to give basically everything that you owned. And what's so fascinating is how, when we're stuck and we don't want to give and we're jealous or we're feeling stingy, or we want to keep something to ourselves, we're covetous, that we don't. It's hard to recognize that how unpleasant that is if one's not paying attention, because what you're focusing on is, I want this, this is mine, this is what I'm getting. I have this thing that I want to keep, and you might be keeping that thing, but what's really behind the mind of that is so unpleasant, and unfortunately. We believe in that so much. We believe that that's good and that's helpful, and it's really hard to get out of that. That's why, again, this whole being stuck in the mire is such it's a stuckness. We can't get ourselves released. And so when we do just do that, and it's amazing when you do an act that's giving to another person in some way, how easy it is to forget that, that, oh wow, this was so beneficial and so helpful to me. And so I do think that anytime it's done, even if it's just like going against one's nature, it's just immediately like flares up as like, oh, this is so amazing and incredible, so helpful.
That phrase from the Buddha is really worth, that's great to bring up because it speaks to everything we've been talking about. I think he says, if beings knew the benefit of giving as I know, a being would never give without having, never eat without having first given. Even if it was their last mouthful of food, they would never eat without having given. But because beings do not know the benefits of giving, stinginess overcomes their minds and they eat without having given. So,
in a related and kind of supplementary sutta is the Buddha's talking about the power of giving and saying that, even say like a few grains of rice, like leftover food, like if someone throws those away or throws it away, outside or into a pond, thinking, made the beings in this pond benefit from this food, then even that's going to be beneficial. That's going to have positive fruit in the future. All the more with something that you give to a person. And so if anyone wanted to make a commitment, either now publicly, this could be a dangerous thing, or if you want to send us an email later, or if you want to just tell your spouse or your friend or your Kalyanamitta, if you wanted to make a Saraniya pledge or an idea that before you eat, you're going to give something, even if it's just a few grains of rice to the beings in your backyard or something like that.
Or maybe before dinner. It could be hard to get it in before breakfast.
That's true. We only have the one meal a day, so it's
Yeah.
easier for us.
Yeah.
We don't have to be as generous.
But we can find these little things. But I remember that was being done to me at a Baigui Kantiko. We were walking through the line, and he just kept, he would, every day, he was just picking something out of the line, and he would put something in the bowl. And, you know, sometimes I didn't want what he put in my bowl. But I just remember that as like, he just had such a smile on his face when he was doing that. And I've done that with other monks, you know, that's kind of a common thing. Or even made the point at the end, because now I'm sort of in the beginning of the line, is to then go to the end of the line and put something special into one of the junior monastic bowls.
Yeah.
And then make a point to do that to a different one the next day or whatever. Not it's the same person, but yeah, that it's sort of just, it just makes one feel really happy to be able to do that, and it's it brings up that sukha, non-dukkha.
Yeah. And I think one last thing is if someone does take on a daily practice, it can become routinized, so that like every day, if you're doing this, you know, say like a couple weeks in, you might have a feeling as you're giving away your, you know, part of your apple or your rice grains, like it is just a movement. It is just a motion of the body. You know, the mind really isn't into it. But I don't think that on the whole like degrades the practice, you know, because on some future day, the inspiration might come back again that, okay, this really is a good thing, and I'm glad I'm in the habit of doing it. Yeah.
And I think one good sort of, not balancing, but good, there's just one other helpful thing that the Buddha said around this to sort of bring in the aspect of practice again, and we have to go in a second. But, you know, he also said that he goes through the merit gained from giving to various different parties, and then, you know, giving to a Buddha, to the Sangha is worth 100 times as much as giving to, you know, so on and so forth, until he says that spreading metta for the length it takes to milk a cow, I don't know how long that is, 4 minutes?
Or even just a little squeeze.
Is worth, provides us, you know, much more merit than even giving, and realizing impermanence for the length of a finger snap provides even more merit than that. So I don't think he says that to devalue giving at all, and I think that what we're pointing to is the importance of establishing that as a basis in daily practice, but just also to bring in the aspect of that internal cultivation alongside once again, and the Buddha was very clear about the power of that when they're held together. So,
and I think lastly as well, which we haven't mentioned, is to be a good receiver. And that's one thing, if you're going to go with a challenge, Ajahn Kovilo's challenge, that you actually have to also in your life look at how you receive gifts. And I know for myself, having sort of a perfectionist mind, I can be like, oh, that's nice, but you know, and it's like really important to know like that just receiving something and just trying to understand like the power of goodness that's being transpired with two people, you know, two individuals, or even one to a group or whatever it might be. It's incredible, just that receiving quality. And when we gracefully receive something that somebody else is really giving to us, then it's just so it's so beneficial then to that other person. So they are getting that direct return back when you can really look into your heart and see like, oh well, if I was to be, would I do this? Am I capable of giving? Am I capable of doing this? So if there's ever kind of either embarrassment or I shouldn't have it, because that's another tack people take, is like, I'm not good enough for this. You know, I'm just so lowly. But either way, whichever conceit you have, whether it's you're worse than others or better than others, it's all conceit. So try to really work on that in terms of receiving, making that a receptive quality within yourself. Because when people are generous, we want to encourage them to continue being that way, and also be able to receive the fruit of it ourselves. So.
Well said, Ajahn. And it's great to see so many people on the chat. I've seen a lot of names which know and recognize, and thank you so much, everybody, for coming and spending your Christmas morning with 3 monks on a computer. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's great. 7 a.m. on Christmas.
Yeah.
Didn't You didn't run down to the tree and open all the gifts. Not that everybody.
They might have already.
But yeah,
And
very good.
What's our topic for next week, Ajahn?
Oh, for next week. So yeah, we're gonna have a new topic, but it's not gonna be a sutta so much, although it's one of the things the Buddha talks about. But I'll read this question out so people can get this. I'm wondering if in one of your upcoming videos you might speak on the topic of wanting to be liked. Perhaps you could contribute some of your own experiences with this kind of desire. It's something that wants to drive the ship fairly often, and it's hard to let go of. Caring what other people think and self-consciousness also comes to mind around this topic. So those are, and also the topic of being or feeling rejected by others. Again, any thoughts? We could probably talk for the rest of the year on that. But that'll be our topic.
Praise and blame.
Praise and blame as well, if you want to look into the 8 worldly winds. So we were jokingly saying that we could do praise on the next on this Tuesday and blame on Friday. We'll see if that happens. But yeah, it was lovely being with all of you, and lovely being with these 2 fellow monastics I live with.
Yeah, likewise. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everybody.